2:06, so I think we'll get going, and I have a little bit of a monologue anyway. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us today. If you're here for the Fire Hardening and Defensible Space webinar, you're in the right place. Get settled in. We'll start shortly after these brief announcements. This webinar is brought to you by the Newport Beach Association of Realtors and the Laguna Board of Realtors. So huge thanks to Kimberly Foreman and Bobby Jordan for arranging this for us. Kimberly will be muting anyone who forgets to mute themselves, and she'll also be monitoring the chat and looking for raised hands once we get to the Q&A portion. But please hold your questions to the end because your questions will probably be answered during the presentation. As you guys probably know, I'm Ruben Gellage. I'm a manager at C.A.R Properties. I'm president of the Newport Beach Association of Realtors. I'm the director at large for the Laguna Board of Realtors. I'm a licensed California attorney and a certified C.A.R forms trainer, but who cares? More importantly, with me today is John Baldakowski, broker record for C.A.R Properties, who's my mentor, and he's going to be looking over my shoulder to correct any misstatements that I can and will make, and he'll raise any questions for the guys that I forget to ask. So our esteemed guest speakers today are guys from the Newport Beach Fire Department and Laguna Beach Fire Department. They're actually the ones who performed the inspections that we're talking about today. So thank you to Ramey One, Life Safety Specialist with the Newport Beach Fire Department. And thank you, Justin Day, the Fire Safety Inspector for the Laguna Beach Fire Department. Before we get into the Q&A, I want to give everyone just a quick outline of what we're going to cover. First, I'll do just a real brief overview of AB 38. Then I'm going to ask our fire inspectors some relevant questions that realtors need to know. And then we're going to open it up to the Q&A for everybody in case we don't cover what you guys want to hear. And then finally, for whoever wants to stick around, I'll go through the FHDS form because hopefully it's going to make a lot more sense and you guys will be able to more easily complete that or advise your sellers on how to complete it once we hear from our fire inspectors. So a real quick overview of AB 38 and why these fire inspections and the FHDS form are suddenly a thing that we all have to know about. Well, first, the requirement for a property owner to maintain defensible space around improvements on the property, that's not new at all. But the state realized that it just wasn't being done, and the lack of compliance was creating an unreasonable safety hazard in California. And it just didn't make sense for California to go around and try to inspect everybody's property. So the state said, okay, well, at least when a property is sold, we can then try to ensure fire safety measures at that point. And fortunately for us real estate professionals, the state did not create a strict point of sale mandate, but they created this middle ground. So California AB 38 established that as of July 1st, 2021, that California Civil Code section 1102.19, and that code section will become important in a little bit. It requires a seller of real property located in a very high fire hazard severity zone to provide the buyer with documentation stating that the property is in compliance with defensible space requirements. You go, hey, that sounds like a point of sale requirement. But the good news for us is that the law allows that if documentation demonstrating compliance cannot be obtained by the close of escrow, the seller and buyer can enter into a written agreement showing that the buyer agrees to obtain documentation of compliance within 1 year of the close of escrow. And that written agreement between the seller and the buyer is contained in section 3 of the FHDS form. And a quick note about why the FHDS form is so important is because it falls under that Civil Code section 1102, which I referenced, which is the same section that the TDS falls under. And like the TDS, the transfer disclosure statement, if it's required but not delivered to the buyer, or if it's delivered incomplete, it opens a right of rescission for the buyer to cancel escrow all the way to the close of escrow until that document is delivered and completed. So I don't want any of you listing agents out here to open up a loophole for a buyer to jump out of escrow at the last second, and they would have the right to get their deposit back, because then you're going to have to explain to your seller, oops, I screwed up and I left a loophole open for the buyer. So that's why the FHDS form is so important, that it's completed and delivered when it's required. So we'll get to more on the form in a bit. First, I'd like to ask our guest speakers from the Newport Beach Fire Department and Laguna Beach Fire Department a few big picture questions that help agents advise sellers on completing the FHDS form. So Ramey and Justin, are you guys ready?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so both Newport Beach and Laguna Beach do have local vegetation management ordinances requiring defensible space around the property, correct?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me show everyone here why that's important on the FHDS. This is just real quick. Because in section 3 in Newport Beach and Laguna, you will always check this box if the form is required. The property is subject to the local vegetation management ordinance. And similarly, when you're completing section 3, the default is that there's no local ordinance, which we know is not true in Newport and Laguna. So you're going to have to figure out which one of these 5 you have to check the box on. Next question, does either city's ordinance require your inspection before the sale can close escrow? So let's start with Ramey. In Newport, does the city require the inspection because the property is sold?
The city doesn't. We will do it when requested, but we don't require the inspection. We would fall back to the requirement of getting the CAR of the real estate side, but not under our, I would say no.
Okay, and thank you.
Yeah.
Justin, in Laguna Beach, does the city ordinance require the inspection as a point of sale?
I'm going to agree with Ramey on that. It's the state requirement to get an inspection, not the city requirement.
Okay, perfect. And then similarly, does either city's ordinance require that the property pass inspection before the sale can close? I'm going to presume no, because if they don't require their inspection, how are they going to require compliance?
No, that is correct. We do not follow that up until we are called for reinspection.
Okay, and same with Laguna? Yeah, Justin?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, cool. Let me screen share real quick one more time the form, because that's going to knock out 2 of these options of the 5 that the seller or listing agent advising the seller has to pick. You will never pick number 2 in Newport Beach or Laguna Beach, because that says that the local ordinance requires compliance as a result of the sale. Similarly, in Newport and Laguna, you will never check the box for number 4, because that also says the local ordinance requires compliance as a result of the sale of the property. All right, that's why I wanted to start with those couple ones, because they're so important for agents to understand how to fill out the FHDS, and it knocks the choices down for the things that agents can fill out. Let's jump to a couple quick, easy ones. Ramey, in Newport Beach, what's the cost of the fire inspection?
Cost of the fire inspection is $219 payable in the city hall. Unfortunately, we don't have it by credit card or phone. You have to come into Civic Center to pay.
So pay by check or cash?
Yes, you can pay in person by check, cash, or credit card, but it has to be in person at this time. We're trying to convert it over to an electronic means, but not yet.
Okay. I'm going to bring a bag of pennies in just to support you guys to get the credit card payment. And Justin, in Laguna Beach, what's the cost of the fire inspection?
Currently no cost right now, but we are assessing and implementing a fee to have that inspection conducted.
Okay, so eventually there will be a fee, but right now in Laguna Beach, the inspection is free, which is my second favorite F word. Ramey, what triggers you guys to come out and inspect the property?
Usually it's somebody calling me. Usually it's the beginning of that process of seeing if you're in the zone or out of the zone. The best way to do that is to call me direct if you're in the city of Newport Beach city limits, because I can answer that question first and then get into the payment method second. Others have gone out to the state fire or county fire, and they have a portal that you would add your address in, and the county or the state kicks that to the local, i.e. Newport or Laguna, whoever's in charge of that, to handle. So however you attempt, it'll come back to the locals when you do that. Just know that.
So someone's got to call you. It's not, that the city, someone opens up the report for the city report, the RBR, and you guys are notified.
No, yeah, that's totally separate from the RBR. I know that's more of an automatic kind of thing, but not this category. You need to call me.
Okay, and can the agent call you, or does it have to be the property owner?
Both can call me.
Okay. And Justin, in Laguna, what triggers you to come out and inspect?
Just like Newport, normally the realtor will reach out to me to schedule an inspection. That's how it's been done. We have a online process where you can actually go online, and we have a GIS based map that you can search the home that you're selling and see if it's actually in that red zone. If it's in the red zone, then they can schedule an inspection online. That will go to my email, and then I will reach out to them and schedule an inspection.
Awesome. And I see Kimberly popped in the contact info for Ramey in Newport Beach into the chat. And Kimberly, I'm guessing you're going to do the same for Justin. You'll pop his contact info into the chat as well, or a link to the portal. Ramey in Newport Beach, how soon from the time someone calls you to come out can you actually make it out?
I will quote you 2 weeks. And if we need to do it sooner, then you just got to work with me directly and we will get you in sooner. I think I've been pretty satisfactory so far, so let's just keep that rolling.
Okay, awesome. So agents, 2 weeks. If you have a 7-day all cash close, you may want to consider when you take the listing, talking to the seller, whether they want to have this inspection performed or not, to get a jump on that in case the buyer asks for it. You don't want to delay the close of escrow. Justin, in Laguna Beach, how soon from the time it's ordered can you get out there?
Depending on when the actual order comes in through the email.
Oh, hang on, Justin. I think Kimberly muted everybody because it sounded like somebody. We were getting some feedback.
Sorry about that.
Okay, Justin, if you can unmute.
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
All right.
So you said depending on when it gets ordered?
Yeah, so depending on when it gets ordered and when it comes in, usually from the point of time that I contact you to the point that we schedule an inspection, I would say it's around 3 days, depending on how busy my schedule is.
All right, 3 days, pretty quick. Ramey, you got a snap 2 weeks in Newport and 3 days in Laguna.
Like I said, 2 weeks is my standard, but with this last guy, I did it in a day and a half, so we nailed it.
Nice. Okay, so depending on workload.
Definitely. We do try to help the agents out. I know some of these sales are very timely and you need to get it done. So we try to work with you as best as possible.
All right, cool. Justin, if you can get the city of Laguna Beach getting their RPRs done that quick, that would be awesome. I know the agents would love that. They could get that cranked up in 3 days. So Justin, while I got you, how long does your inspection typically take? I know it's probably a range depending on the property, but
yeah, it's a range depending on the property. The most I've spent on the property is half an hour. The least amount of time I spent on the property is 10 minutes.
Wow, the most is half an hour. And now, is that because you're only looking at defensible space and not home hardening?
Correct, yes. So we are looking at defensible space, and a lot of the homes in Laguna do not have a sprawling acreage. It usually extends at most 20 feet from the structure itself. Okay. So it's usually a walk around the structure and noting the deficiencies and then sending off that report.
Nice. And Ramey, you guys are looking for home hardening and defensible space in Newport Beach, correct?
That is correct. Yes, their homes, due to the age of construction, do already have it instilled in them upon construction. So we do look at those things different, like the attic vents and those things. We do ping on those because we do have those in our municipal code to comply with in that high fire zone. I'm trying to go back to the original question.
About how long does your inspection take?
It's about the same, 10 minutes on the minimum, 30 maximum. And believe me, I could talk for an hour if they let me, but about 30 minutes max.
All right. And Justin, how long is your inspection good for? So if you come out, you give them a clear inspection, property's in compliance, how long is the compliance report good for?
The compliance report per the AB 38, Ramey, correct me if I'm wrong, is 6 months from the date of the compliance letter. Then after that, if it's past 6 months, they need to reschedule an inspection for us to come out and do another one. Okay.
And Ramey, the same with Newport then? Because that sounds like a...
Concur.
Okay. Which makes sense because on the FHDS form, there's a part where the seller must have obtained compliance within the last 6 months for them to be able to say we're in compliance. So that makes sense. Ramey, what happens if a property owner refuses access to the property? Say the listing agent comes out and the owner says, get the hell off my property. I don't want you here.
Well, on my document, I have this box that says refused inspection, and I would just check that he refused it and then go about my day and leave the property, and they wouldn't get that inspection. But and we'd have to reconvene at another time and work with that agent.
Okay, you don't turn the fire hose on them?
No, no.
Oh, that's a shame. Justin, what about you guys? If a listing agent calls and the property owner says, I don't want you here.
We won't even do the inspection, and I'm not going to push it and get involved with that. That's between the homeowner and the realtor.
Okay, and on your report, do you have something that says inspection declined or denied, like the Newport?
We don't have anything like that thus far because I haven't run into any situation like that.
Okay.
But if that does happen, then we can work out it case by case.
Okay. And Justin, once you complete your inspection, who do you send the report to?
It's typically been the realtor that I send it to. Sometimes the homeowner does request the report, but typically I send it to the realtor.
Okay, and super importantly, you're not sending it to the city of Laguna Beach.
It's just being
Correct.
stored in our internal fire department database.
Okay. Ramey, is that about the same for Newport Beach?
Yes, that is correct. Once the inspection's completed, it goes to the homeowner or the agent, whoever's in person there, along with the other documentation of how to harden the home. And then that does go into our public records here in the city.
Okay. And if the property is not in compliance, what's the next step for you guys? Let's say in Newport Beach.
So I would check the box of the violation that I found. When I issue that documentation, I would educate the agent or the homeowner, and then I step away. And then I'm assuming that the homeowner or agent will fix those items prior to close of escrow, and then call me back out to re-inspect that to then show that you abated those violations. Now, I am not chasing that violation notice. Once I issue it, I step away, and it just vanishes to me until I get recalled for the re-inspection. But I'm not actively pursuing that violation, or will I issue a citation on that?
Okay, is there a re-inspection fee when you come back out?
Negative, not with Newport Beach.
Okay, so no citation, no fine, no re-inspection fee, and you don't chase them down. I like that. Justin, is that similar in Laguna Beach, that if the property is not in compliance?
Exact same as Laguna Beach. We aren't going to come and knock on your door and break in your door and say, why didn't you trim your tree? It's going to be on the onus of the homeowner and whoever sells or buys it, whatever that agreement is. And it's the same exact as Newport Beach.
Okay, and if the property is in compliance, does the report mention that the property complies with Government Code 51-182? And let me share again real quick of why I asked that specifically is because our favorite form, the FHDS form, has a box that the seller or listing agent can check that they have a final inspection report disclosure and says it's in compliance with Government Code 51-182. So a lot of agents say, I have no idea. So Justin, does your report, if it's in compliance, reference Government Code 51-182?
It doesn't specifically reference the government code. What it references is defensible space guidelines, which are those are utilized to create our defensible space guidelines. So it doesn't say directly the government code section, but it does say our municipal code, which is where the 51-182 is used.
Okay, so if they have a report in compliance, they'd be safe to check that box that it does comply.
Correct, yes.
With 51-182. Newport Beach, Randy, the same thing?
So our document does talk about compliance with a certain code, but I need to go back and verify that code because I have it under compliance with Civil Code Section 1102, not the government code. So I need to verify that.
Okay. We'll get verification on that. And yeah, again, that 1102, that's the civil code that requires the seller to make the disclosure or come to an agreement with the buyer that they will be in compliance. Justin, in Laguna, are there areas of the city that are in high fire zones that you don't inspect?
The state does identify a high fire zone in Laguna. And I have seen some roll through because on your hazard disclosure form that you get, it does say high. The city did not adopt the high zone. So if you see high on your disclosure report, not very high, it does not need an inspection.
Okay.
You only need an inspection when it says very high fire hazard severity zone.
Okay, for Laguna Beach.
Correct.
Yeah, okay, and to clarify for the agents out there, even if the fire department does not inspect the property, or if CAL FIRE doesn't inspect it, if it's in the high or very high, you very well may still need the FHDS form. I know that was a point of confusion that listing agent thought if the fire department doesn't inspect it, we don't need the form. That is not the case. And Ramey, are there areas of the city that are in high fire zones that you guys don't inspect?
Yes, there was a recommended zone that the state did, and then we adopted a certain area of that recommended area. So there is some confusion out there that you may need to do the inspection, but you're not in the adopted very high fire zone. And let me take a step back. In the local smaller jurisdictions like we are, and Laguna, there are no very high in that category of gradient of risk. The locals only have a very high fire zone. It's the state responsibility area that has those other gradients of very high and moderate. Changing soon with the new maps, because then the local areas will have that gradient of very high, high, and moderate, but not yet. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm going on tangent here.
Yes, so there are some areas of Newport that are in high fire zones that you will say we don't inspect that property.
Yes,
Or that
because it's
area.
what we adopted
Okay.
is different.
Okay, and if you guys don't, should the agent or the owner call CAL FIRE to see if they do? Ramey?
No, if it's within our jurisdiction and our city limits, call the local. They will be the
Right.
ones responsible to help you.
Okay, and same with Laguna?
That is correct.
Okay, excellent. Are you guys ever able to tell an owner or agent whether they need to complete the FHDS? Now I'm seeing Ramey shake his head no.
Yeah, no, I don't want to step in that world. I wasn't trained for those forms, and I don't yeah, those are too deep for me.
And I'm guessing the same, Justin?
Correct, that is the same. We don't, I've, had a couple of people try to, ask me how to fill out those forms, and, sadly, like Randy said, we are not trained.
Okay, and I think the agent's brokers would appreciate, that the agent needs to figure out how to fill it out or advise the seller how to. And like we talked about, because if a seller is exempt from a TDS, they're exempt from this form. And I remember, Ramey, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I asked you if you ever knew if a seller was exempt from a TDS. And I think you said, "What's a TDS?"
Yeah, what's a TDS?
Perfect answer. That's so the fire authorities are not able to tell agents whether they need the form or how to fill out the form. But like we're seeing today, there's a whole lot of information that you guys do have that help listing agents guide their sellers on how to fill out the form. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience at this point. Let me pop open the chat. I don't see any in the chat, but if you guys do have any, please raise your hand. I'm not sure how I see the raised hands or if they just pop up. Kimberly?
It'll be in the participant screen. I don't see any hands or any questions in chat at the moment.
Wow, Ramey, Justin, you guys are awesome. You told them everything. They don't have any questions. Can everyone hear us? If that, John, unmute. Let me know that you guys could hear us, that we weren't just talking to ourselves.
Ruben, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
This is Steve Hyde.
Hey, Steve. Of course.
So when we got these forms, there was a place that we could go to called an FHZ viewer. I believe I'm saying that correctly. And you could actually put an address in, and it would show whether or not the property is located in a high or in a very high severity zone. Is that website still good, applicable, that we can use to determine whether or not the property is located in one of those zones?
I'll defer to Ramey and Justin and give my opinion if they don't have one.
If I'm not mistaken, when you talk about those FHC zones, that's taking you right to CAL FIRE, which is the fire department of the state.
Right.
That's going to give you the state responsibility area, and the almost too big of a picture is what I'm trying to say. They will be a portal to enter in that address, and it'll tell you yay or nay. But specifically to Newport Beach, you might get a yes from them because they recommended, say, a certain area on the other side of San Joaquin Hills Road, but it's not in our adopted zone. So I would tell you no, but the state would say yes. So there's why that confusion exists. So that's why I say, just call me direct if you're in Newport Beach. Anywhere in Newport, call me on that one.
And Steve, I've been seeing that the NHD companies are doing a great job of updating their maps and making it easy for agents to figure out if they're in a high or very high fire zone, because there's, the high fire zone, a supplemental fire zone that a lot of them now are putting in big red letters, AB 38 with the box checked next to it to really make it apparent whether it's in a high or very high fire zone, according to the NHD companies.
Hey,
yeah, Justin.
Ruben, just quickly, are you able to pull up the slides I sent you?
I sure can.
So the second slide, there you go. So for those realtors that are in Laguna Beach, we have created this very friendly search tool in our GIS database that you can put in the address of the home that you're selling, and it will zoom in to the house that you are selling. And if it's in the red shaded area, you do need an address, or you do need an inspection, and you do need to contact us. Ruben, if you want to zoom out, that QR code will lead you right to the map that you're able to use to see if you need an inspection.
That's awesome. Ramey, you guys got anything like that in Newport?
Not yet.
We just got your cell phone number.
Yeah, I'm trying, but yeah, not yet.
Awesome. I like
Ruben,
that.
you have
getting
a
competition going. Yeah, Bob Chapman. Bob, I see you're
Sorry.
unmuted. Oh, there you are.
Yeah, you may have covered this, but it's my understanding that we may be getting conflicting information from various hazard reporting companies. And in certain areas, a house may not be checked as very high under one NHD company, and it's checked as very high under another NHD company. Just curious if you all have discussed how to move forward, how to handle that when we've got those two different approaches and two different, quite frankly, philosophies now coming out of NHD companies, because they believe they're getting some pressure from the real estate community and owners about putting houses under that designation, and it's causing some sort of anxiety.
That's a great point and question. My understanding is that what the state requires of NHD companies does not line up exactly with AB 38. So that's why there have been some discrepancies between what the NHD companies have been putting out and what the actual zones are. It sounds like the NHD companies are, working not only to lobby to the state to make them get in compliance, because NHD companies are saying, well, we're afraid to do anything we're not specifically told we have to do, but there's that discrepancy, like you pointed out. I know that some of the NHD companies are also offering indemnifications for the homeowner, the agent, the brokerage, if their maps are incorrect, because they are constantly changing as well. But that is a great point. My recommendation, and I know I tell my agents, is contact the local fire, even contact CAL FIRE if it is, look at the NHD map. And if any of those come up with a high or very high, then you should probably default to getting the inspection and using the FHDS, unless you're exempt for other reasons. But yeah, that's a very good point, that there are discrepancies on some maps. Justin, here, are you going to have to run to a fire?
No.
Bob,
Can I ask
did that
one
sort of
more
answer?
question?
Okay, yeah, Steve, just a sec. I just want to follow up with Bob to make sure that that's at least as much information as we have.
Okay, thank you, Ruben.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Steve?
I've yet to see an actual NHD report that uses the term high. I mean, I've seen lots of very highs. I mean, have the NHD companies adopted the high zone at this point?
Yes, I believe that they have, and they're changing it to line up with, the the language of AB 38, because I think they had, before they had the very high fire zone, and then they had in a, wildland area that blah, 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 that essentially meant high, but it didn't just explicitly say high. So yeah, I know that the major NHD companies, they are now adopting the language of AB 38 to make it easier for homeowners and listing agents to comply with the requirements and to know whether they're in a high zone. That's a great point. Any other questions, comments while we have Ramy and Justin? No, let me look at the chat. We had something in the chat. Oh, Danoop saying we can hear you. Thank you. I'm glad we weren't just talking to ourselves. All right. Well, if we have no more questions, Ramy, Justin, thank you guys so much. You're of course welcome to stick around. I'm going to go through the FHDS form. If you guys care to kind of see that. If any other questions do come up, pop them into the chat and raise your hands. And again, thank you so much to Ramy 1 and Justin Day of the Newport Beach and Laguna Beach Fire Departments, respectively, for their time and all their information and everything they do.
Thank you, Ruben. I appreciate it.
Yes,
Have a
thank
good
you
day,
so
everyone.
much. Thank you so much and have a good day. I am available. We are always available. So let us know, call us and we'll help you.
Awesome.
Any questions, just reach out. We don't bite.
Cool. And their info is in the chat. All right, well, let me share my screen and jump to everybody's favorite form. And C.A.R. attorneys say that this is by far the most confusing form that they have, because the way that the state came out with AB 38 and sort of legislated into the funnel, and C.A.R. had to hurriedly put this form together to help everyone comply. This also has this decision tree, the 3rd and 4th page, which in my opinion is more confusing than just reading the form itself. And they've made this user-friendly that if you read through, it should make sense. Now, the home fire hardening disclosure, the requirements line up with paragraph 2, whether the seller knows about any of these features that make it more or vulnerable to wildfire. So all of these 3 or 4 requirements have to be met in order for the seller to have to complete the paragraph 2. So if the property contains 1 to 4 units and the seller is required to complete the TVS, and the property is located in a high or very high fire severity zone, and the property was constructed before January 1st, 2010. If any one of these 4 conditions is not met, the seller doesn't have to answer these questions in section 2. Now, the defensible space compliance are the same requirements, the first 3, that it's 1 to 4 units, seller has to complete the TVS, and the property is in a high or very high fire zone. But we notice for defensible space, it doesn't matter when the property was constructed, because we're not talking about the construction of the property itself or the home, the improvements. This is just the area around it. So it doesn't matter when the home was built. If any of those 3 are not met, they don't do it. But if all 3 are met, then they're going to complete section 3 as well. The things to point out with section 2 is seller, are you aware? So I'm glad that C.A.R. changed the language of this to line up with the TVS and SPQ. So if the seller doesn't know, then the seller is going to say no. Now, if I can jump real quick to the Newport Beach inspection report, the bottom part has recommendations for home hardening. So if the seller has had this report done, they're going to know a lot of the answers to the questions in section 2, because most of these line up with the questions in 2B of the FHDS. If the sellers had the inspection, I recommend that you review it with them to make sure they're not saying no to any of these. That would be a yes based on that inspection report, because if they have that report, they'd be deemed to have constructive knowledge of these features. Section 2 is pretty straightforward. Section 3 is what gives most people the hardest time. A lot of times people are not checking the box for is or is not subject to a local vegetation management ordinance. And if you don't check a box, this form is incomplete And like an incomplete TVS, it opens up a right to rescission for the buyer. So make sure that you're checking a box. And as the gentleman talked about, if the property is in Newport Beach or Laguna Beach, the property is subject to a local vegetation management ordinance. Section 3B can be simplified to just whether the seller has had the inspection report or not. If the seller has not had the inspection, I would leave the default that they're unaware of whether the property is in compliance or not. If they have had the inspection, they're going to want to pick either 2 or 3 that the property is in compliance within the last 6 months, or they'll know if the property is not in compliance. Section 3C, like we talked about, you'll have to check a box because the default is that there's no local ordinance. Just to back up a second, 3C is the section where you're going to determine whether the buyer is responsible to be in compliance within 1 year after the close, or if the seller is going to be responsible, and that's negotiable between the buyer and the seller. Section 2, like we mentioned, if you're in Newport Beach, you'll never, or Laguna Beach, you'll never check this box because there's no point of sale requirement. And same with number 4, you'll never check this box if the property is in Laguna Beach or Newport Beach because there's no point of sale requirement. The box that we see most often right now is 3C3, which puts the onus on the buyer to be in compliance because there is a local vegetation management ordinance in effect, does not require compliance as a point of sale requirement, and the buyer is going to obtain documentation within 1 year. Now, like the gentleman said, nobody's coming out to reinspect unless you call them out. The state's not going to come out to reinspect. Where the rubber's going to hit the road on this is if you have a fire or if the neighbor has a fire and you're not in compliance, your insurance company is going to try to deny coverage because you are not in compliance. If the seller is going to take responsibility and they already have the report and they know they're in compliance, you can check the box 3C5, because the seller has obtained documentation of compliance within the last 6 months. Like the gentleman said, the reports are good for 6 months. If the seller wants to take responsibility but has not gotten proof of compliance yet, you'll check 3C6, and that the seller is going to obtain documentation of compliance prior to the buyer's final verification of condition, which we know is 5 days before the close of escrow by the default in the RPA. On 3D, you can fill out the local agency from which a copy of the documentation as applicable may be obtained. And if you have the final inspection report that shows compliance, like we talked about before, check the box in section 4. So to tie these two together, if the seller is responsible and they have the inspection report already that shows they're in compliance and you check 3C5, you're also going to want to check section 4 and just attach a copy right to the report. So that's about as simple as I can make that form for you guys after going through it with the fire department guys. Are there any questions on the form? I see we lost half the audience, so you guys are experts on this. I'm going to ask John Balikowski, put him on the spot. Is there anything else I missed that you want to make sure that the audience is aware of?
Everyone, why don't you address, like, sometimes people have questions as it relates to, can't the city just show up at any time right now, regardless of the state of affairs of whether the property is in escrow, and demand that the homeowner is in compliance? So
that's a good point. Yeah, the city, because of the ordinance, or even the state because of the state law, they could show up and inspect the property. Now, if they're not let onto the property, they're not going to be able to inspect. But the city ordinance and the state laws are in effect whether or not you sell the property. That there is a requirement to have defensible space around the property. And like Ramey said in Newport Beach, they also have home hardening requirements as well, that they could show up. Now, they're not at this point, but to reiterate the point about insurance, the pain point that the property owners are going to feel is if there's a fire in the property burns down, insurance is going to try to deny it by saying you were not in compliance. And if they've had the inspection done and they were not in compliance, they could subpoena the fire departments to look at those records to show that there was a record that the property was not in compliance and there was never a re-inspection. Similarly, if the neighbor's house burns down and the neighbor knows that your house was overgrown, they, may blame you for not being in compliance with state law and causing their house to burn down. As an aside, something that Ramey talked about a couple weeks ago when he spoke at our office, he said they're not looking at tree houses, they're not looking at dog houses, they're not looking at every structure on the property if you've got something in the backyard. An ADU maybe, a separate detached home maybe, but your tree house and your dog house are probably okay. Is that right, Ramey?
That is correct. We do look at like ADUs or, structures away from the main structure. But lately our focus for the fire departments is that from foundation out to about 30 feet. That's where we're noticing that where we can make the biggest difference. And then the science is showing that we need to worry about that 0 to 30 feet. And that's what the science is showing us. So that's where we're putting a lot of the efforts. And that's why these AAB laws are coming out on private parcels with local governments telling people what to do on their private parcel, because the millions and billions have been spent by insurances. Insurances are vacating that hill. They're not wanting to insure people. So what we're trying to do, along with the commissioner, the state insurance commissioner, is keep insurances here in Newport, keep it available for our citizens, and keep it affordable. And by doing the mitigation measures and keeping that risk and wildfire down, then the insurances can stay and they can fund all this and take care of these homes and stuff like that. So I hope that answers the question.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ramey. Any final questions before we sign off? I can't believe we're out of here in under an hour.
Real
I
quick,
think
John, why don't you address the issue? Because, we're talking about fire and we're also talking about insurance and why it's so important. One thing to have the client, the borrower, the buyer, contact an insurance carrier, and why is that important related to the transaction within the due diligence fund?
So great point. With fire insurance harder to get and the cost going up, agents need to understand that the ability to get insurance on the property falls under the inspection and investigation contingency, not under the loan contingency. So if the buyer removes their investigation contingency, but then they have a problem getting insurance for their loan, or the premium's so high that they say, I just don't want to get the loan because it's going to cost me an arm and a leg, the buyer would not be able to cancel under the loan contingency. They would have had to still had to open their investigation contingency. And the newly revised RPA has a line explicitly that says that as well. So get your buyers to contact their insurance companies early on in the process. If you're listing a property, order the NHD report right away, so that the seller knows what zone they're in, and you can have the discussion whether they want to have the inspection or not. I think in this market that we're in and heading into, more sellers are going to want to have the inspection done and get the property into compliance to make it more marketable for the buyer. If you're representing a buyer, explain to them the FHDS form, and if they're going to obligate themselves to be in compliance within 1 year, what that really means and what the scope of that work might entail, because you don't necessarily want to just write a blank check for your buyer to say, oh, it's normal that the buyer assumes the responsibility to do it within 1 year. Nobody's coming out to reinspect, so this is kind of a nothing burger. You want to make sure that the buyers understand the ramifications of this as well. Awesome.
Yeah, Ramey, real quick, did you address, and if I missed it, I apologize if I'm repeating myself, but did you address whether the city goes out on perhaps even a condo or a PUD, looking at perhaps if there's a violation in reference to a balcony like that?
For condos, yes, I've done inspections on condos. For example, the Travari Ziani communities here in Newport Beach, up in Newport Coast, they're in the high fire zone. They are considered, I think, R2s, condos. And it's very hard because you have the HOA property that's up to the foundation of the home. So if I was to write any corrections, it almost falls back to the HOA to take action on for those homeowners to sell. And that gets in a bind. So In the past, I'll say this, I haven't done it recently, but in the past, I would look at the homeowner's area of influence where they truly own. They might own the back patio area. So I would wrap that up as part of the inspection as the back patio and the vegetation within that back patio. But if there's a problem with HOA, I almost put it as a recommendation that they need to push the vegetation off 5 feet or X, Y, and Z and try to hit those mitigation measures for the HOA. But what I'm scared to do is check the box of a violation and have the homeowner on the hook for something that the HOA is responsible for, because that gets a little crazy. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it was, but it was more so along with that, because we do have some patios that go into some common areas. But if a homeowner has a giant palm tree that probably shouldn't be right up next to the property, is that something that the city would notify and say, you know, you really need to remove that and take that one?
So as of January 1st of 2023, right now, there are 3 municipal code sections in our municipal code that we just added. And one of them is no tree shall touch a home or overhang a house. That is number 1. Number 2 is the house and attic vents. They need to be 1/8 inch mesh or 1/16 inch mesh, metal mesh, non-combustible, because a lot of the homes up in that zone are built to the 1/4 inch mesh, and that allows the ember intrusion into the house. And so we were trying to turn the dragon's head on trying to get some defensible space before this fire comes, because it's just a matter of time. So no trees shall touch and overhang a house. Metal mesh screens must be upgraded to the 1/8 or 1/16, and there must be now a 12 inch from foundation out, 12 inches non-combustible. So instead of bark mulch in those planter beds, replace them with rock beds or pavers or something else that won't burn. Those are 3 actions in our municipal code right now that if I went to an AB 38 like I did yesterday morning, I checked 2 of those 3, and that agent and those homeowners, the seller, will have to work through that. So the fire department is noting those things, and we chose the top 3 that we think will take the community, because the Laguna Niguel fire, those 21 houses, 20 homes burned down because the 1/4 inch mesh. It was no other reason. Those embers went right into those attics and burnt from the top down. The other one, the one house, that was an open garage door. So those embers just went right into his garage and took it off. We Newport Fire are trying to shift this mindset, get the trees and the cypresses off the house and try to make it defendable. And with that comes the insurances to stay. So it's kind of yin and yang, but we are trying to turn the dragon's head and talking about those specific items like trees touching homes and those vents that are the biggest problem, I think.
May I ask a question?
I think you just did, but go ahead and ask a second one.
All right. How long is it in Newport have we had this local vegetation management ordinance, Remy? Is it a long time?
We probably started the first weed abatement, I would say in the late 90s, mid 90s. And then hazard reduction came in. That was the next big one. Hazard reduction is an older standard, and that's the 100-foot linear foot rule applies on the hazard reduction. That's more like Cameo Shores, Buck Gully, Morning Canyon. Not until you get to the Newport coast, those communities up on the hill, that do you have the 170-foot setback with zones and irrigated zones and approved planting to then defend the fire. All of this was implemented late 90s and the 2000s, especially in the fuel mod came in the 2000s. And back then it was really hybrid. It was like, give us 100 feet and then make that exterior wall a 1-hour rated wall, add sprinklers to those homes along the canyon, and you're good for the developer. Well, we know now that the ember casting coming out, there's no more direct flame impingement on the house. Now it's ember casting into the community out to 2 miles. How do you protect those homes? It's by hardening the home, changing out the roofs, changing out your vents, and worrying about the raining of embers and that ember storm. And that's where the state is at right now. And that's why we're talking private parcels, 0 to 5 feet and all this other stuff.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I could have swore the first time that we went through this new form that everybody said that we didn't have local vegetation management in either city. So I plead guilty. I'm wrong on that.
I just took a class and found out that fuel modification setbacks have been going on since 1968.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
join my club.
And I understand that's why the state passed AB 38 is because there were these ordinances, but nothing was really being done. And so
And
that,
I with wearing this patch kind of have to believe that we were part of that problem, and now we're fulcruming hard to not be a part of that problem and trying to provide this safety layer in a built environment. And we know there's changes coming, more changes than what we're talking about today. And I don't want to bog down, but there's changes coming. And I think that we're looking at the removal of the Italian villa up there, and that's scary. What I would love to do is talk to designers and really design to that, and then let it run and let the homeowners install that and try to keep the permits costs down so that they can change the vents, do the landscaping, do everything under a certain umbrella that we can document it, but not charge the homeowner. That's the goal. Make it cheap and affordable so they can do it.
yeah, and I think as things change, we'd love to have you back, in a year or maybe even less time as things change to, go over this again and the current state of things, because it does seem like things are changing pretty rapidly.
Definitely. Yes. Agreed. Thank you for having me too, by the way.
Thank you. Bob, I see you unmuted. Did you have a question or comment?
Well, since we have him here, that following up, Steve, in the ordinance, my understanding is, and everybody's been talking about, the state basically came up with legislation, rules, ordinances over the last few years. And they were very, very strict and very, in some cases, more onerous than some communities and cities thought was important. So I think the cities then had the opportunity to do their own ordinances based upon what their individual situations were. And that is what is in place now, which can keep be changing by each of the cities, by the city councils and the fire department. Is that really kind of where we are and how we started this a few years ago, where we are now and where we may be going, because it's not over yet?
That is correct. What we knew now is different than what we know today. Or what we knew then is different than what we know today. So we are adapting. For example, those 3 municipal codes I just spoke about that are in our Newport Beach municipal code. When the state lobs out the new 4291, they are going to have the zone 0. They're going to have the intermediate zone all the way out to the 100-foot extended zone. They're going to replace the state code is going to replace what is currently in our municipal code. Instead of a 1-foot non-combustible, I'm hearing a 5-foot of ignition resistive from the foundation out. That's what the PRC 4290, Public Resources Code 4291 will be looking at in the future. So instead of just worried about the Newport Beach 12-inch non-combustible, the state's looking at a 5-foot zone, ignition resistive defined, along with the 6-inch vertical flashing on the wall. So that embers that hit the wall and drop to the base of the foundation, they don't kindle and burn the house down. They want that ember to drop to a non-combustible zone and just go away and just piddle out. Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay, so that's where we're at as a state, and we know that the PR's Public Resource Code 4291 is already in change. I'm sitting on state committees and state fire marshal committees on all that language and even how they're modeling the fire flame licks and what data they're putting in the computer so the model reads proper.
And so I know we probably covered it, but so, because we get the term, are there ordinances? Is there an ordinance? What's been passed? And my understanding is defensible space really lies in the municipal codes and the way in which Newport Beach and Laguna Beach have revised their municipal codes to handle defensible space and things like that. Or are there new particular ordinances in place? Because that's a question we get asked.
So the ordinance's blanket is by the state.
Okay,
The defensible space is required by the state if you're in that high fire zone. And I'll say in the local area, you got to be in the very high fire because that's all we have. That's the only zone that the locals have is the very
Right.
high fire. But when you get into state lands, they have moderate in yellow. What is that? High is in like pink, and then red is very high. That is changing soon because of the laws that they're talking about at 30,000 feet. And the state has to have a minimum of law, which is right now they have the 30 foot and the 100 feet for PR's Public Resource Code 4291. And I know I'm getting too deep here, but what I'm trying to say is that their codes will catch up to our municipal codes. So now we're really strict. If we're going to create municipal codes, we have to be more strict than the state. We can't be less strict.
okay,
So when we create a municipal code, we have to be more strict and tighten down a little bit more. And that's why we're so specific in those 3 items. But when 4291 comes out and they're going to have a 5-foot ignition resistive zone and you got to replace the vents and no trees touching home, then our municipal code is going to vanish because that code by the state is going to take over. When they adopt that code and get that, when the cities and the locals adopt that code. And that's usually on a triannual cycle. Like this January, we just adopted new fire building electrical codes across the states, at least California.
I'm assuming the municipal code in Laguna Beach will come under the same type of action and jurisdiction.
Yes, they can be more specific than the state, and then they can be even more specific for their needs, not just Newport Beach's needs. We look at ourselves, and Laguna will look at themselves when they do those.
Yeah, thank you.
Ramey, can I just ask one more question? This is Steve High. So on our form, which I know you don't know our form here, it suggests that we can go to CAL FIRE's website at whatever, fire.ca.gov.defensible space. You're saying to us, call you because you're going to have a different standard than this. Is that correct? Am I understanding what you said to us correctly?
If you're in the city limits of Newport Beach, just call me because I am your inspector for that inspection. No matter where it sits in the city limits, it's all going to come back to me.
Okay.
Does that make it clear? Because I know I've told some people that, some agents that, and then all of a sudden they're going to this CAL FIRE website, and then all of a sudden I get an email back under there from CAL FIRE saying, hey, this person wants to reach out to you and get an inspection. And I'm like, I just talked to them. Just call me if it's in city limits of Newport Beach, and I would call Justin if it's in Laguna. Keep it simple.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
No problem.
Ramey, is there any talk at the big levels of making a point of sale mandate to where the seller can't just agree with the buyer, that the buyer will do it within 1 year?
If they are having those conversations, it's still up at the state level in closed door situations, because others are worried about when these new requirements drop, is there going to be a timeline stretch? Are they going to have an amortization timelines, or is it going to be immediate, or is it from here on these new homes? All those questions are, and the fire departments still don't know that answer. So if they are having those conversations, they're doing it quietly within CAL FIRE.
Okay, and is there any talk in the city of the city report triggering an inspection to mandate an inspection in Newport Beach?
No, not. There's no reports. It's going to be the house that goes for sale, that agent or the owner needs to know and call. I don't think we're going to be proactively chasing this, because the fire departments, we didn't even know this was codified until January of last year, and then it became effective July. So we were scrambling. All the locals were scrambling, trying to create these documents, looking to see if we had ordinance in place and all this other stuff. Luckily, Newport had it in place. Laguna already had it in place. We just had to create the inspection document, and we kind of went off what the state was doing, so we weren't too far off in a tangent, and that's where we're at today.
Great, and great job with the inspection report too, whoever put that together, because I think that, dovetails very well with the state requirements and what agents are trying to figure out also. All right, I see we're past the top of the hour. If there's no other questions, I'd like to thank Steve Hyde, Bob Chapman, John Baldkowski for the great questions, great follow-up questions. Of course, Ramey and Justin again for being here. Thank you to Kimberly and Bobby for putting this together through the Newport Beach Association of Realtors and the Laguna Board of Realtors in collaboration. And thank you to all of you for being committed to your continuing education, not only for your benefit, but for the benefit of your clients and the public at large. So thank you guys so much. If there's other classes you guys think are important that you want the boards to put on for you, just reach out to us. And we're happy to do it. All right, with that, thank you all. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Ruben.